This is how I deck build as a $25 budget brewer. For starters, it's important I eat my greens. Card advantage, removal, and lands are all extremely vital in making sure I have a good showing from my decks. Without enough lands, I run out early on and can't keep up with the rest of the table. Without card advantage, I'll run out of gas too quickly and be unable to close out the game. And without enough removal, will be helpless to everyone else's game plans and strategies, watching as they can win the game with little resistance. A big difference can also be if my deck has green in it or not. For most of my recent decks, I've been building them commanderless. This gives me several benefits, but the one I care about right now is the freedom it gives me in deck building. I'm not constrained by my commander's CMC, effect, etc. I can worry about all of that later. For now, I just need to decide on a couple of things. 1. How much mana will my deck need? And 2. Does my deck's game plan have a clear way at closing out the game? The first question might seem odd at first. One might assume that we'd always want as much mana as possible, but the reason I ask myself that is to determine if my deck needs ramp. Now, of course, certain decks need ramp, and it's extremely invaluable, but I've found that it's not always the case that that's true with all decks. I personally have found a much greater success running more lands and cutting out ramp for the most part to free up extra deck space for other ratios in the decks that don't absolutely need a tremendous amount of mana. It can seem unorthodox at first not having a mana rock to play on turn 2, but that doesn't mean there aren't other cards to play. In my games, they tend to go on the later side. With all four players running responsible amounts of removal and interaction, no one really runs away with the game all that fast, since someone's always there to stop them. Throw in a couple board wipes into the mix, and games can go past turn 10 easily. With this in mind, I started noticing that mana rocks never felt good to actually play aside from the random utility ones, and would much rather increase my land count to have more consistent experiences. This gave me a number of benefits, ranging from being able to keep more opening hands and mulligan more aggressively, since I'm more likely to have enough lands for my spells, and not having to effectively pay for mana in the later turns when we've run out of lands in hand. Not to mention that they're significantly more likely to get swept up in a random board wipe or removal piece. It's just led me towards wanting to cut them and run more lands. For rough ballpark numbers, I tend to run around 44 lands depending on the deck, dropping as low as 40 if it's a tight curve. So what if we do need tons of mana? Let's say I'm building a Golgari Regrowth deck that wants to throw out 5 mana tutors and play lots of big meaty spells. In these decks, mana matters. I'm willing to spend lots of mana to get even more later since the deck has such a high curve. I generally only run these in decks that have green since it's the most consistent at making sure I can keep the ramp I play without it being interacted with later. Depending on the curve depends on what CMC my ramp is played at. If I'm extremely aggressive, I'll run as many 1-drop ramp spells as possible into 3 mana ramp the turn after, but most likely I'll end up using 2 mana ramp into 4 mana double ramp. This allows me to curve out fast whilst having around 7 mana on turn 4 with only 2 cards. In decks like these, I'll for sure be running at least 42 lanes, climbing as high as 50 if I'm desperate, with about 25 to 30 ramp pieces to make sure I can create that abundance of mana the deck requires. Remember, we're building on a budget. We don't get access to the hyper-efficient tutors and engines, so we've gotta work with what we have. On to the second question. Does my deck's game plan have a clear way at closing out the game? This is important for determining how much card advantage I need. If the theme I decide to build my deck around doesn't really close on its own, it'll need support, which means either running more closers or more card advantage. If it does have a clear path to closing, the problem solves itself, and I won't need to run as much card advantage since my top decks are better at getting me there. Generally though, I'd prefer to run more card advantage than less, as it's great at helping shore up weaknesses in ratios and find you what you need at any given point in time. Its downside, however, is that you're spending mana doing things other than improving board presence and closing out. This isn't to be taken as a major downside, but one worth recognizing. If a deck can be built with perfect ratios and a perfect curve, it theoretically might not need card advantage, since its problems are already solved. But it's all theoretical. There's always variance in shuffling a deck and drawing 7 cards, and ultimately card advantage is best for smoothing out that variance. Lastly is removal. I love removal. Depending on the deck depends on how much I run, with some of my more extreme decks running around 30 pieces. This is where things get tricky, however, and we need to look at the context of the rest of the deck. We need to be inversely proportional to our card advantage with removal, since card advantage is what helps us find our removal. The reason I can run so much in certain decks is because the removal I use also helps close the game, and therefore I don't need extra card advantage to help me find any since it's already so abundant in the list. For other decks, however, like my Kellen Most Simic pile, I only run 12 pieces of removal since the deck boasts 30 ramp and 25 card advantage, with most being X spells that draw me insane amounts of cards. Since this deck has no problem finding anything at once off the deep draw, I can get away with running lower amounts, but that's not to say removal is any less necessary. We still need to be able to stop the dragon player with a threatening board wider than my stomach after eating an entire golden corral out of business, as well as the combo player who's been tutoring and sculpting their hand all game. It's very important we have a say in how other players contribute to the board in the game, because as soon as we don't, we lose a lot of control and say over the game, and it'll lead to the game ending before we're ready. Now, this entire video so far has been about me telling everyone that my decks work because I eat my greens, and I haven't really gotten to the fun stuff with the synergies and how we actually close out the game. But truthfully, that's the easy stuff. We can do whatever we want as long as the rest of the deck is responsible. We can set up a super strong Blink deck, or a random Rocco Toolbox deck, or whatever else we can really think up. This is the part for individuality. As long as it's within budget, we're golden. After the whole deck is done, we can look for a commander. I usually like to goldfish my deck a few times to get a feel for how it'll curve out and interact with the other decks at the table, and get a feel for my deck's weaknesses. If I'm lacking deterrent for attackers early on, it's worth noting for whatever I ultimately decide to put in my command zone. I'll usually at this stage go to Scryfall and look at all the legal commanders within budget for my color combination, as well as some partner pairings in case there's any that catch my eye. Value commanders almost always work well since they can help allow us to do the vegetable thing with even more consistency. But sometimes I'm not feeling like going with a certain commander, whether it be because I've got friends that have already built them, they're really popular, or bad. Whatever it may be, this is where I get to truly be creative in what I put as the face of my deck. Recently, I built a Bant Blink deck. My friend had already built Rune, so I ruled that as out of the question. And Lagrella caught my eye, since she was pretty good at accentuating my removal package, and having removal in the command zone could make for a nice way to keep my opponents in check, out of fear of known removal. Ultimately though, I noticed my deck had a hard time actually closing out the game, and went with Storvald instead. After playing with the deck, I had a blast. It was amazing, always having it be difficult for people to resolve combat, since all of a sudden, no attackers or blockers were safe with a single blink in my hand. Moral of the story is, once your deck is done, picking the commander can be way more fun and flexible since it's being put in a completely different context than how it may originally read. We all want our decks to work, and it can be frustrating to be told that we need to do the boring stuff to have more fun with the rest of our decks. But it doesn't always have to be boring. I like extremes. I like pushing decks as far as they can go and seeing if they can still work or not. How much ramp is too much? How many lands can my deck run before I finally feel like I have too many? Personally, this is what I like to do. We're all individual deck builders, and we all have fun with different deck building styles. If you guys are at all interested, I've made a few budget lists for the community to help with brewing unlimited funds. I'll post them in the description of the video so you can check those out after you make sure you've subscribed. But I've also got them in my Discord, and I'm updating them there too. As always, if you like this video, and think someone you know may benefit from watching it, consider sharing it with them, so we can all become better deck builders together. This has been Tacos Rock, and I am out.